guys, welcome back to part 2 on how to make a paracord bullwhip. So let's start off exactly where we left last time, and we just finished braiding the first belly using 6 strands of paracord. So the next step is to take some insulation tape, clamp up the paracord in your vise and start to tightly wrap all of the layers together. This is not only going to compact the layers together, it's also going to make sure that they never ever become undone in the middle of the whip. So now that that's done, the first belly is complete, and now it's time to make the second belly. So I've got all of my paracord laid out here with a tape measure, and I've cut 2 pieces of 30 feet, one of 25 feet and one of 14 feet. All of the strands need to be gutted in the exact same way as last time. And also, yet again, I'm going to be doing the exact same thing when I'm tying the knots in the paracord. I'm going to find the middle and then go about half a foot to the left or to the right and then tie the knot, so that the knot's not directly in the centre. And as always, I'm going to be doing that on every single strand which I've gutted. So here's where it might start to get a little bit complicated. Now that every single strand has got a knot almost in the middle of the paracord, you then need to take the 2 30-foot strands, find the knot and line them both up, and then wrap them both around the back of the whip just like we did last time. Again, wrap them all the way around and fold them down to opposite sides and make sure that they're overlapping in the middle. Pull down where they both cross over with your thumb so that it doesn't come loose. Loosen it off then a tiny bit and take the end of the 2 remaining strands and then feed it through the gap between the crossed over pieces of paracord and the bullwhip. Pull down on the 2 remaining strands all the way until they reach the knots. Then tighten everything up by pulling the 2 crossed over strands tight again. Once you pull everything onto the right side that they should be on, you should have 4 strands on one side and 4 strands on the other side. I'm going to be using exactly the same plait as we did last time, which is going to be taking the top strand round the back, but this time, since we've got 4 strands on each side, we're going to be going under 2 over 2. Then take it round the front and return it to the position at the very bottom strand. Since some of the strands here are 30 foot long, it's going to take quite a while to pull all of them through. And as always, after each plait, you want to make sure that you pull everything tight. So we just used one from the left hand side, now it's time to use one from the right hand side. We're going to take the very top one at the back, round the back, under 2, and then over 2. Again, then pull it round into its original position. So this is just the exact same plait as last time, but instead of using 3 strands or 2 strands, we're going to be using 4 strands for a while. If you don't understand it, then you can go back to my original tutorial at part 1 and then see how I started it off there, because it's pretty much exactly the same. So here, as you can see, I'm continuing to braid all the way down the core of the whip just as I was doing earlier, and I'm doing the under 2 over 2 formation. Although these bellies do take a very long time, it's really important that you make sure that you're making them very well and not having any imperfections in, because otherwise it'll kind of mess up the balance of the whip. So I've braided all the way until one of my strands has become too short to braid with, and I'm going to drop it the exact same way as last time. Braid until it's the next one to be used and then wrap it around the core of the whip very tightly and tie it down with a piece of insulation tape. So as you probably remember from before, I'm going to be braiding over the strand that I just dropped. And on one side I'm going to be braiding with under 2 over 2, and on the other side I'm going to be braiding with under 2 over 1, since there's only 3 strands there. So now this is what it looks like once I've just dropped the next strand, and there's only 3 strands on each side now. Since the number of strands on both sides is equal, I'm going to be braiding it just going under 2 over 1 on both sides, just like we did before at the start of the first belly. So we just used a strand from the right hand side, now let's use one from the left hand side. Remember, take it round the back, under 2 strands and then over 1 strand. Then pull it back over to its original side and pull everything tight. Now I'm just going to continue to braid until the next strand becomes too short, and I'm going to drop it in the exact same way. So you've probably started to see the pattern here already, what's happening. I'm going to continue to braid all the way until a strand becomes too short to use. Then I'll drop that strand, continue to braid over it until the next strand becomes too short to use. Then I'll continue to braid over that strand once I've dropped it, and just continue to braid until all of the strands start to run out. So here I've dropped another strand, and now there's only 3 strands on one side and 2 strands on the other side. As usual, on the side with 3 strands, go under 2 and over 1. On the side with only 2 strands, since it's an even number, just cut it down the middle and go under 1, over 1. And yet again, you guessed it, continue to braid over the dropped strand and all the way down the core of the whip until the next strand becomes too short to use, and then drop it. Here I'm dropping the next strand exactly the same way as I did it earlier. Wrap it all the way down the core of the whip very tightly, as tight as it'll go, and then tie it down with some insulation tape. Now there's only 2 strands left on each side, and it's really simple to braid with this. Just take the back strand, take it round the back, under 1 and over 1. Now continue to braid until the next strand becomes too short to use, and then the braid is finished for this belly of the whip. So here you can see one of the strands has become too short to use anymore, and there's only 3 strands left. So I'm going to drop that shorter strand by tying it round the whip and wrapping it around very tightly, and then tying it down with more insulation tape. And just as before, I take the next shortest strand and do exactly the same thing, but wrapping in the opposite direction. Then do exactly the same with the subsequent 2 strands and make sure that they're both secured down with more insulation tape. So this is what the whip looks like once the final belly is complete. You can see that it tapers really nicely from a super thick handle all the way down to super thin ending. Also, you can see that the braiding ends about 1.5 feet from the end of the whip. So now, just as last time, we're going to be wrapping the outer layer of the whip in some tape. What's different this time is we're not using insulation tape, we're just going to be using this stuff called athletics tape or climbing tape, which is going to mean that the outer layer of paracord is going to be able to grip the whip a lot more easily. This is going to mean that the outer overlay layer is not going to slide about on top of the whip as much. So now it's time to make the 12 plait overlay layer on the whip. This is going to be the very outer layer of the whip, and it's going to be the only layer of paracord that you actually are going to see, so you want to make this look really good. I've picked 2 contrasting colours, which are yellow and black, and I think that's going to look really nice once I make it on the whip. So since this is going to be a 12 plait overlay, that means that we've got 12 strands of paracord, so we're going to need to cut out 12 strands of paracord. The length of these paracord is going to be 2 strands of yellow at 16 foot, 2 strands of black at 16 foot, 2 strands of yellow at 14 foot, 2 strands of black at 14 foot, 1 strand of yellow at 10 foot, 1 strand of black at 10 foot, 1 strand of black at 8 foot, and 1 strand of yellow at 8 foot. As always, every single strand must be gutted of the inner strands of paracord. So if you thought things were complicated on the last belly, well, this one's going to be even more complicating. What I've done here is I've taken every single strand of yellow paracord and then I've taped it on all in a line like this and then pulled it off to one side. As you can see, they're all lined up in an order and none of them are overlapping. It doesn't really matter what order you line them all up in though. I then do the same with every single strand of black paracord by taking a piece of insulation tape, laying it out and then placing each strand of paracord one by one onto the sticky side of the tape, then sticking it down over the yellow strands. Wrap them all nice and tightly in the insulation tape so that it doesn't become undone. Also, as you can see, all of the black strands are going off to one side and all of the yellow strands are going off to the other side. Now it's time for the braiding. We're going to be using the same braid that we were using earlier, but this time it's with 6 strands on each side. So we're going to take the very top left yellow strand, take it round the back of all of the other strands, and then under 3 and over 3 since there's 6 on each side. Pull it all the way through and then twist it round and put it back in the position on the left hand side. Make sure that all of the pieces of paracord on each side don't become overlapped and that they stay untwisted and just flat in a single line. Since we just used yellow, now we're going to use the very last black. Take it round the back, under 3 of the yellows, then over 3 of the yellows, pull it back over into position and remember to pull all of the string all the way through. Remember to pull everything nice and tight. Sort out all of your strands again, and now it's time to do the next step of the weaving. We're just going to continue to do exactly what we've done for the whole of this bullwhip tutorial pretty much, and take the back left hand strand. Since we just used a black strand, we're going to be using a yellow one. Take it round the back, under 3 and over 3, just like we did before. Since some of these strands are really long, they might take quite a long time to pull through. Now pull it back round and into position, and then make sure to pull everything tight again. Continue with this exact same weave, going under 3, over 3, all the way until one of the strands starts to become too short to use, just as we've done before. As you continue to braid, you can start to see a pretty cool pattern emerging. Remember, as you're weaving, to pull everything nice and tight and make sure that you do your weaving really neatly, because this is the layer that everyone's going to be able to see, and this is going to be the outer layer that's not going to be covered up by anything. So one of the strands has become quite short, and it's now time to drop it. As you can see now, since this is the outer layer, I'm dropping it when it's got a little bit more length, so it's got much less likelihood of coming undone. However, it's still dropped in the exact same way as last time by wrapping it around the core of the whip and then taping it down with a bit of insulation tape. So since we just dropped a black strand, there's only 5 black strands left on one side, and then only 6 yellow strands left on the other side. So when you're weaving with the yellow strand, you're going to take it round the back, under 3, and then over 2. And when you're weaving with a black strand, you're just going to weave as normal, take it under 3, over 3. Now, as per usual, just continue to weave until the next strand becomes too short to use. So here the yellow strand has become too short to use, and we're going to drop it exactly the same way. Just wrap it around the core of the whip and tie on some insulation tape. So now we've got an equal number of strands on each side, and there's 5 strands on each side. So we're going to be going under 3, over 2. So you get the idea now. Continue to weave and drop strands when they start to become short. So normally when we've got an even number of strands on one side, we just split it down the middle and go under 2, over 2. When you've got an uneven number of strands on each side, say like 5, you go under 3, so under the larger amount, and then over 2, which is the smaller amount. So here is what the whip looks like once we've weaved for quite a lot longer, and there's only 4 strands on each side because we've dropped 2 more strands, and we're going under 2, over 2 on both sides. Remember, as you continue to go down the whip, to pull everything really tight, because you don't want any of this outer plate to start to become undone. And you also want to make it so that it tapers nicely by squeezing everything together. So yet again, another strand has become kind of short, so I'm going to drop it again, wrap it around the core of the whip, tie it down with some insulation tape, and continue to braid over it. Since there's only 3 strands on one side, it's under 2, over 1. Then I've gone and dropped the other black strand over that strand because they both ended in quite a similar rate, and then now it's just 3 strands on each side, so under 2, over 1 on both sides. Now I've gone and dropped another black strand, so there's only 2 black strands left, so when I'm taking a yellow strand, I'll go under 1 strand and then over the other black strand. When I secured all of the other strands, when I dropped them, I put down lots of insulation tape, but Athletics tape has a much more secure surface, which the paracord can grip to much more easily, so I'm going to tape that down over the insulation tape. The 3rd yellow strand has now become too short to use, so I'm going to drop that in the exact same way as last time. Just tie it around the core and tie it down with some more insulation tape, and then continue to braid over that strand. There's only 2 more strands on each side, so it's under 1, over 1 on both sides. It's really important when you're doing this under 1, over 1 formation to pull everything really tight, because you want this part of the whip to be very thin and also to be very streamlined by pulling everything nice and tight. Here you can see that I've reached the last kind of foot of the whip, and this is just the bare paracord which I used for the very core of the whip at the very start of it, and I want to make sure now that I'm pulling the braiding really tight to make it nice and thin and also very secure. So here I've reached the last couple of centimeters of the core of the whip, pull everything nice and tight, and then just put over a piece of insulation tape just to hold it down for now. It's time to make the fall of the whip, which is the little bit of paracord that comes out the end of the thong of the whip, which is the braided part. And so what I do is I take a piece of black paracord, don't degut it at all, and this is a piece of paracord 2 feet long or 60 centimeters. Then take a lighter or some matches and seal both ends of the paracord so that they don't fray and the inner won't come out. So now take the paracord and tie a simple overhand knot. Slide it so that it's close to one end of the paracord and then twist it round and refeed the long end of the paracord through one of the edges of the knot. Pull the knot tight and then pull everything through until there's just a small knot left. This knot is called a slip knot, and when you pull on it, the loop makes it even smaller. Pull off that insulation tape that we put on earlier and pull both of the strands to the right side so that they're meant to be on, then widen the slip knot so that it's large enough to fit over the whole of the whip. Slide it over every single one of the strands until it's up on a part of the whip that I've finished braiding. Then pull it really tight around the whip. I then grab a pair of needle nose pliers and make sure that it's pulled as tight as I can possibly pull it. Then take the long end of the fall and place it in with the core of the whip and lay it down in the same line as the core of the whip is going. I now take my shortest black strand and tie what's called a half hitch knot. I take it round all of the pieces of the whip and then feed it back through itself and pull it very tight. Remember, what I'm doing is I'm taking it round every single strand in the whip, even all of the strands that I was braiding with. When you pull it tight, slide it back up so that it's touching the fall. I then take the next strand and do the exact same thing. Take it around every single strand, including the fall and the core, and then put it back through itself and pull it very tight. Do exactly the same thing with the next 2 strands as well. So now I take my scissors and cut off each strand about 3mm from where the knot is. When you're doing this, remember very carefully not to cut off the fall of the whip which you just made. This is what it should look like once that's been done. I then take my lighter and melt down all of the frayed ends and then push them against all of the knots so that they'll never become undone and they're all welded closed. So now that's done, the whip is now pretty much complete. The final thing to do is to make the cracker. This is the fluffy part of string on the very end of the fall which is going to make the crack of the whip. There are many tutorials on how to make crackers for whips out there, and just search on YouTube how to make a nylon bullwhip cracker or something like that, and I like to make my crackers out of the paracord inner which I gutted from all of the paracord. So once I've made my cracker out of 2 strands of paracord inner, I'm then going to loop it around the end of the fall on the very tip and then tie lots of half hitch knots just as I did earlier to secure it on. Once that's done, your whip is actually complete and it can crack really loudly now. For a more aesthetic look, what I like to do on the end of the whip is to tie a Turk's head knot and then also a lanyard which is just tied with a cobra stitch. This loops around my wrist and then I can hold onto the Turk's head knot and it looks really nice and it looks much better than just the standard end. You can also find tutorials about how to do this on YouTube if you just search how to tie a Turk's head knot or how to make a paracord bracelet. So now the Turk's head knot and the lanyard are completely finished, the whip is now done and the crack is attached and we can test it out. Since this video seems to be going on for ages, I'll just have a couple of test cracks now, and then next week I'll do a proper whole video of cracking the whip, testing it out, doing different types of cracks in slow motion and popping water balloons and stuff like that. Thanks for watching, guys. I really hope that you've enjoyed this video, and if you have, please hit the like button down below and subscribe. If you did enjoy my video, you might like some of my others, and you can see previews of them here. If you want to find out the full videos, then go to my channel and check them out.